So, to continue the WIPAC Podcast live from WEX Global, I'm sat here with Jim Southworth, and Jim's going to be attending a session later on talking about serious gaming. But in this podcast, he's going to give us a bit of a memory of how things used to be and an impression of where we're going in the future. So, Jim, how have you seen over the years the development of the water industry and how it's changed?
Thanks for the opportunity, Oliver. It's much appreciated. This WEX event has been fascinating for me because I have started to realise at the end of my career, really, about the amount of change that has taken place in the industry. It's just incredible. And it is probably within the last 5 or 6 years that change has really manifested itself. I began as an engineer in the water industry. I graduated in 1976, went into an engineering department, the engineering department of a water company, North West Water Authority. And my specialty at the beginning was working on networks and concrete structural design. I got my civils, my professional qualification on the design of a concrete tank, a 1 megalitre concrete tank serving a village north of Rochdale. Interestingly, I could have placed that tank anywhere in the village, and it was my decision to place it in a particular location. There was no consultation with the people in the village. We owned a lot of land in the area as the water company, and I made the decision on where the tank would be sited. There was nothing in it other than I thought it was the best place to fit the tank. It suited the hydraulic gradients, it suited the location. On reflection, it would have been nice to have met with all the people in the village and spent some time with them, telling them what I was doing and why it was happening. It was actually going to improve the water supply to the village, which had actually been intermittent for a number of years. So lots of improvements, lots of things that we did. But as a professional engineer, we just did it without the opportunity or even the intention to tell the folks what we were actually doing for their benefit. It happened and they were all happy. I moved out of engineering then and moved into operations. And the first project that I had back in 1980 was to begin the rehabilitation of the water networks in North Manchester. The rehabilitation of the water networks, the networks were very old, industrial areas, so the water pipes, some of which were over 100 years old even then, old cast iron pipes that were heavily encrusted internally, very poor hydraulic qualities, ultimately resulting in dirty water for customers, low pressures, and the outcome was something which was exceptional. But again, we would descend on an area, I would do the plans, decide which mains were going to be replaced or rehabilitated first. Maybe the area had a population of around 10,000 people. At the end of it, the outcome was excellent. People were well served, but in the means to the end, to actually get to the point where we provided that service, we never really spoke to the people. We would come out with a van and a tannoy to tell them that their water was going off. Your water is going off. It will go off in half an hour. Please take water that you can today and save it for the rest of the day so you can boil water and use it for drinking purposes. That was as much customer service as people got. And everyone thought it was okay. And at the end of it, we did maybe in this particular area 10,000 people. We did maybe 30 or 40 kilometres of water main that was rehabilitated, some replaced, some scraped and cement mortar lined. And out of all of that, the end product was really good. But the people had lived for a month through devastation to get there. It would actually spend some time with the people at the beginning to explain what we were doing, what we were trying to do for their benefit, even though we were all professionals and trying individually and personally to do a really good job. They had no idea. The people that we were, if you like, replacing water supplies for, the water pipes for, had no idea what we were doing. It was just chaos for a month. And obviously there were fractious times when people parked cars that got blocked in when we carried out excavations in the road. So all kinds of things happened. So I look at the way in which the industry was then, and in this WEX, which is predominantly about new technologies, digitization, the advent of such work as such tools as serious gaming, there is a complete change in the way in which the water industry relates to its customers. The technology that the water industry has to hand now to solve these problems are way in excess of anything we ever had back in the 70s and 80s. And I just see the change in the industry has been absolutely incredible, for the better, really for the better. Had we had these technologies then, I can still see that some of the older engineers that I interacted with would have seen them as fancy tools. Just get the job done, go out there, do the design, get the job done, use your slide rule, do the calculations, everything will be fine, just get on with it. But to take people with you, to have people understand what's happening, I think is for the better. And people can then understand why they're paying the charges that they are for water. They have a better understanding and appreciation of the industry and what it's doing and trying to do. Whereas in the past, it was just, this is how it is, we're professionals, we'll do it for you, leave it to us, you don't need to know. And people in the 70s and 80s, many of them had lived through, the end of the Second World War, through rationing in the UK, and they accepted that the authorities had the authority to do whatever they wanted within reason, and sat back and allowed people to do things that perhaps weren't right. Things could be a lot better. So that's a brief summary of my thoughts of then and now.
So what do you think has facilitated this change? Is it privatisation? Has that helped facilitate the change? Because, of course, the companies are more to account now on the privatisation.
Yes. I think privatisation has had a huge impact. I remember the industry in the UK, pre-privatisation in 1989. In 1987, the industry, certainly in the Northwest, we had a moratorium, so there was no expenditure. The public purse was king. If the government didn't give you the money, you had nothing to spend. There was nothing in the kitty to use on projects, and I remember periods of time when we had no money at all in the capital programme, nothing to spend. And some great engineers working on the principle that I call bean tins and string to actually make things work. Some great engineers. And once finance came into place, programs, for example, in then Northwest Water, moving towards the industry spending up to £5 billion a year at that time, when they had nothing to spend, in the hands of some highly competent engineers, the industry changed overnight. Changed much for the better, because there was then money to spend, and money to spend often wisely, with some good engineers. And the industry benefited significantly from that, because the money was there to encourage engineers to learn more, to understand more. And engineers moved more away from being a broad-scale engineer. So I had expertise in networks, concrete structures, water retaining structures, a little bit of work on earth dams, all kinds of technical components. And I think what's happened is, with the advent of that kind of funding, people were able to specialise on a large scale. So my company then, what became United Utilities, in privatisation in 1989, had around almost 10,000 employees. Pretty soon that started to reduce, but the employees moved towards greater specialism. And that greater specialism brings with it, I think, a greater understanding. It can push people into silos, but it can also help people to understand more about the specific issues that they're dealing with. Again, a better understanding of a narrower field of expertise. And I think that's for the better. And I think the industry has benefited from it.
I suppose, to be honest, the structure of the companies has changed quite a bit, because you said 10,000 engineers there. Now I don't know exactly what that number is, but a proportion of that will be people who deal with the customers, people who deal with the finances, people who deal with different aspects. So that number, say from 10,000, would you say it was mostly engineers then, or?
I think what's happened is there has been it doesn't mean there aren't 10,000 people still employed serving the water industry. There's been a lot of outsourcing. And by outsourcing, the companies had to decide what was the core, what were the core components of the business. I remember back in '89, I had, if you like, a regional responsibility for an area that included, we had a forestry team, I had bricklayers, I had a range of other technical skills under my control, which ultimately were not really our core business. The fact that we managed forestry, that we managed certain building, doesn't mean that we can't go outside now and engage externally with that capability. But there is a limit. At the end of the day, you can't end up with just one man. I pardon this phrase, but I was seated at my organ one day, and I'm on my own. I've got all these keys to press. I've got all these things to do, and I'm the only person in the utility. There has to be a retained level of competence inside that utility, because without that, you can't procure the services that you need. And I think some of the water companies perhaps overstep the mark. Too many highly competent people were allowed to go outside, but it's stabilising now. It's a bit like the swing of the pendulum. The pendulum starts to move, and perhaps too many people go, and then people realise it's gone too far, and it gets stopped, and gets brought back.
It's what they call the intelligent client.
It is
nowadays,
yes.
And I don't know where we are as an industry in those terms, but yes, quite a lot of it has been contracted out.
Yes,
I get your point. You don't necessarily have enough work for a forestry ranger.
Because in winter there was nothing for them to do really. They were tidying up and doing various things.
Yeah, and yes, the civil contractors are taking the job of the brickie, because again, you don't necessarily need a bricklayer at all times.
No.
But I think it also, in some ways, I think a lot of things have changed. In some ways, they haven't. So we've talked about the evolution of the skill level in the company.
Yes.
So way back when, there was that need for a skill shift as a privatisation, and we're still seeing that skill shift in a way. So as these digital technologies come on, then we're needing more data analysts. We're needing more different types of skills, and I suppose that's an element of that is retraining, but elements of that is procurement.
Yeah, but what you cannot avoid is that basic knowledge.
Yeah,
you can't replace that. There has to be that knowledge
retained. That core level of knowledge, of process knowledge, of civil engineering knowledge within mechanical electrical knowledge within.
Yeah, you need that competence to procure.
And it's those. I suppose it's those technical people leading the programs in that way.
Yes.
Otherwise, we want to make bad decisions.
Yes, and the people who make those decisions have to have the best interest of the utilities at heart, but they also have to have a clear understanding of the technical components of running that utility. Because after all, the utility, a water utility particularly, or an energy utility, is a very technical machine. It has to have this technical competence in order to run its business. And if the people who are running that business don't have that technical competence, they can't correctly procure the technical services to come into the company. You can always you continually outsource to the point where you've lost the understanding of what your company is about. And I think there was a little bit of the pendulum moving perhaps too far that way with some of the water companies. But then it doesn't, when I say there were 10,000 people in North West Water United Utilities in 1989, it doesn't mean that there aren't 10,000 people still employed today. It means
in different ways.
Yeah. And I think it's become more efficient. The fact that there are certain trades and services that you don't need 24/7, you don't need them continuously, but you can buy that service when you need it. But it's not core to running a water company or a water utility or an electricity utility. It's not the core business. So,
I suppose that's, in some ways, that's what I do with the instrumentation specialism. Is I'm there,
just the same,
available, and it's contractor service, and there are people within the companies you talk to, and everything else. So
as we know, many people will sell you anything or attempt to sell you anything, and the intelligent company has to be aware of what it is buying so that it gets exactly the right procurement process in place and it buys exactly what's right.
And to the right standard, make sure it's done right.
Yes.
And I think I see that certainly in my area of expertise in instrumentation. The importance is, and we've seen it here with digital twins, the importance is of getting that instruments specified, the right instruments in place, the right quality of installation,
Yes.
and from that comes the right quality of data, which feeds all this intelligence that we're seeing now within the industry.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more.
And it's going to create an interesting future.
Yes.
I'm in the session that we were just in. It's one of the questions is, what do you see? How do you see the water industry in the next 40 years?
Yes.
And I was sat there going, I hope that question comes to me, because to be honest, for me, in the next 5 to 10 years, it's getting that level, instrumentation level right.
Yes.
And then from a stable base moving forward.
Yes. I spent a lot of my career in the water industry overseas. And the one thing that I'm always comfortable with is that water is comprised of molecules. The molecules are subject to gravity. The gravity causes the water to flow downhill. And under those principles, wherever you go, it's the same the whole world over. So there are certain basic commodities that relate to the industry that are unchangeable, that you can always transport. But I'm really excited about the way in which the new technologies, digitisation particularly, and the way in which, for example, serious gaming as a mechanism to allow people to play complex games, to understand better the technology. They may not be the person who really understands how that model has been built or the hydraulics behind the model to actually give you the results that you obtain in the game. But the reality is it gives you the opportunity as a person to understand the variables which come into play when you're dealing with a complex problem. You may not have the ability to fully understand or comprehend the mathematics, but the reality is you understand the complexities of the issues you're dealing with. And I think that's extremely important.
I think it is, and we've got so many of those issues. So certainly wet wipes, the capital consumption, and we've seen some customer influencing on capital consumption that's been really successful.
Yes.
But I remember speaking to the presenter latest, Mehdi Curry. I remember speaking to Mehdi on the phone and saying on Skype and saying, okay, serious gaming, what's it for? And he took me through a case study which is going to be presented later. And it got my mind firing. And it said, the water companies have just been through PR19. In a few years, they'll be starting PR24. Major part of that's customer engagement. And the idea I certainly had was create a water company and get the customers to run a water company for as part of a serious game. And it's partly tongue-in-cheek, but at the end of the day,
I don't think it's that far away.
I don't think it is. And I've always called the water industry the great hidden industry. You open the tap, you flush the loo.
And the less people know about it.
And the less people know about it, the better.
It means it's working well.
That's changing though. And the customer does need to know more because of, and to be honest, fats, oils and greases, I suppose, are they a new phenomenon? They probably were always there, but the level of, they do seem to be relatively a modern phenomenon, a problem with modern life. But actually, if you give a group of people, here's the water company, and through that game, hit them with the different scenarios, well, you've got major problems with leakage because you haven't invested in pipes enough, in your network enough. And that's almost, I can imagine the serious game now.
Yes.
And actually, I can imagine the positive impact that it have on the customer.
Yeah, I think there's a subtle difference in that when I first began in the water industry, people paid what were called the water rates, which had nothing to do with the volume of water or wastewater services that you took. So you paid water rates. So it's based on the size of your house, which was graded against several categories, maybe 5, and you paid one sum related to the size of your house. That was it.
And it's part of the council tax.
And it was part of the council tax. And because nobody had any capital programmes, the numbers we were dealing with were very small. Probably you may pay in water rates £5 or £10 a year for the whole of your water and wastewater services. No capital investment, so it paid some wages, it paid some operating costs, a little bit of energy. That was it. However, today, with the scale and size of the capital programmes which are necessary to convert the industry completely after many years of no capital expenditure, no investments at all in the assets, the difference now is you're asking people to pay nearly £1,000 a year in some cases, and you have to explain to them where that £1,000 is going. People will pay the £5 or £10 and think, well, maybe it's a lot of money, maybe it's a week's wages, but it is what it is, and I'll live with it. Today, the numbers are significant, particularly with the capital programme. So there's a difference.
Justify the investment, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah.
On that note,
okay.
Thank you very much, Jim.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah.
Very interesting to hear about where the industry's come from. And it's quite nice to sort of debate where the industry's going to go.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Yeah. We know where we've been, but we really don't know where we're going to go.
It's always lovely to see you at WEX. And enjoy the session later.
Pleasure to see you.
Take care.
Thank you.